I have enormous appreciation for freedom. So coming here as a young person with one suitcase, adventurous and maybe a little bit idealistic, and reading about the America from Alexis de Tocqueville and, studying Hayek and freedom, which were very popular at the time.
Yeah. Oops. Hello? We lost our link here. Felina?
Yes, I am here. We completely lost the Congresswoman. So it's on their side.
It's on their side, you're sure about that,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
But our audience is still there, right?
Yes, audience is still here and I'm admitting people.
Okay, well then you just keep track of whatever communication they're trying to do with you. In the meantime, we'll say hello to our colleagues there from not only Alianta, but I'm sure well outside Alianta. We just began with the Congresswoman, and seemed like there was a cut, which seems to always happen. Is no matter how many times, it's always like NASA space missions. They have their difficulties too. So the Congresswoman is hopefully going to be with us for 1 hour. She may have to go off to mark up a bill, which we've been told, but hopefully she'll come back on. She's the first member of Congress we've had on the series. We've had a number of diplomats, we've had generals, we've had academics, we've had economists, and we've covered fairly closely Ukraine, which of course remains a huge issue, not just for the United States, but for people here in Romania, which is on the border. There are all kinds of issues coming up now on this side on grain sales.
The names as listed.
Okay, there we go.
Sorry, I apologize. I don't know, somehow I got disconnected. Just give me a second.
Okay. I say it happens. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Okay. So
I know where we stopped, but
we'll pick up where we left off. You were on a train, and you got the United States. You read de Tocqueville, which impressed me for an economic student. And then what happened?
Well, I just say, pretty much, studying the freedom and realizing what's happened in our country where we actually move in the direction to have less freedom made me crazy enough to actually run for office and become a politician. So you have to be insane to be in political environment right now. But when you get pissed off enough, you will actually go stand up and do it. And I belong to a group of people. If you don't like something what's happening, you need to do something about it. So for me, it was very disturbing what's happening in our country. So I started getting involved and started to get rid of some bad politicians, replaced with new ones, and they were the same. So then I got pushed by people to do it myself. And, it's a great honor, huge responsibility, big commitment, but very important times for our country.
You must be as popular in your district as you are in the Ukraine. They must know you in Ukraine, a kind of wunderkid that's done good in the States.
Well, listen, you have to do the right thing. It's not to worry about popularity. Good policies are good politics. I always believe in that. And sometimes, I've always been very popular with the people, not always with the establishment of parties. And I always believe that my job is to represent with the people. There is no lobby for the people. In Washington, D.C., there were no lobby in the State House, and these fights are tough. But if we forget who we represent, we're going to start losing our freedoms. So you have to pick some righteous fights, and they're tough, but makes it stronger.
Good. Now, let me, speaking of fights, have you been back in the Ukraine? Have you visited recently? And how I know your grandmother's there, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, I went actually many times last year because when this war happened and I understood how serious the situation is, I truly believe that I needed to bring my personal, professional experience and understand the situation to share with my colleagues and be able to help to deal with this very brutal war. And I never planned to be involved in foreign issues since we have a lot of domestic issues, but it's really took a lot of energy for me. And I truly believe that to understand the situation, you have to go on the ground and not sit in the capitals like Kyiv or Washington, D.C., but actually go to see the people, go to see the war. So I've probably been in half of regions in Ukraine last year. I went to front lines and to visit with Ukrainian fighters and see what's really happening and be able to, look at how we can do better, because this situation has to be dealt, this war has to be won, and we have to bring peace so it can escalate and become much more even serious, So I spent quite a lot of time last year in Europe too, not just Ukraine.
I see. I mean, one gets mixed messages from the media. I mean, on the one hand, people say that Ukrainians are winning. I saw on Fox News, at least Tucker Carlson was saying that they actually are losing. What do you make of these assessments? You said you've been out there on the ground. What do you think of? How do you see it?
Well, I see that, Ukraine already won a lot of battles. Everyone had assessments that Ukraine will not be able to hold their ground for more than a few days or maybe a few months. They've been in a very brutal war now for over a year. So this is actually a big victory for Ukraine, and it's really only because of the people, of the brave soldiers, of volunteers, it's a people's war. This is the people that fought a lot of wars. They fought for freedoms. They want democracy. They don't want to fall back into dictatorships, into totalitarian regimes that used to, killed a lot of Ukrainians, and they're willing to die for freedoms. But this is pure, not because the government's so efficient or we did a great job. I mean, we helped a lot, or their government did a great job. They actually surviving in spite of all of the challenges we have. And, and actually it's great that Europeans and, and Americans were willing to step up in this righteous fight. But I think if we want to, to have a complete victory and stop this insanity, we'll probably need to get tougher and stronger, and we will need to do probably more in a short period of time and be able to deter further aggression and have this a never-ending war, because it's very destabilizing for Europe and the whole world. And I've been very critical of administration. We actually pushed on a bipartisan basis. They're doing better than a year ago, but still dragging their feet.
Yeah, when you say you're Ukrainian, in fact, when you wake up, if somebody woke you up in the middle of the night, would you, in terms of where you're from, would you say America or would you say Ukraine?
Well, listen, I spent all of my mature life here, so I consider myself American. I have a strong Ukrainian heritage, but we're a country of a lot of heritages, but you can only one country that is your country that you live in and fight for the future of. So I understand that, my country, my family, my children, I'm an American, and this is, but I'm very proud of a very strong heritage of Ukrainian heritage. And the beauty of America is that we're a country with a lot of people, with a lot of heritages. Most of us have some, we're descendants of someone, and, first generation, second, third. And that's what really brings us a lot of vibrancy to our country, which is very positive. And and if we utilize it to the best of our abilities, all of the strengths that we bring, we actually makes us stronger. And sometimes we just unfortunately get in too much politics and drama, which need to stop.
Yeah, I see. I mean, you had a background as a CPA, and you worked as a bank teller, so you're into numbers. And one thing that I always find confusing is the numbers, because when we look at the numbers of people who died, soldiers, Ukrainians or people versus Russian numbers, we always seem to have it, everybody has a different figure. I've talked to many generals, diplomats, and others. What's your sense of that situation, of wounded, dead on both sides? Do you track that kind of information?
Well, listen, I mean, this is war. A lot of people are dying. Okay, this is war from both sides.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of, if you add, you know, Ukraine has much more efficiency. They have a better prepared, you know, military. So the Russians send a lot of people there that not prepared, so their numbers are higher. But if you add civilians that dying in Ukraine, you know, you probably will have a very similar numbers, because unfortunately a lot of civilian populations, and it's a strategy that Russia been using not just in Ukraine, getting killed to suppress the morale, to try, but it is actually makes people even stronger, because when they see the suffering, you know, that actually brutality of the war, it energizes populations. And I think Russians now start realizing that at the beginning of the war, they didn't realize what it's going to do, and how a lot of cities heroically stood, you know, and the cities that actually had a lot of Russian born and Russian speaking population. If you think about the first city like Chernihiv, Kharkiv, Mariupol that were brutally attacked, I grew up in the city of Chernihiv. I was born in Chernihiv region. A lot of former Soviet military went to there to retirement. So it's probably quarter of a population actually is Russian born, has brothers and sisters in Russia and Belarus. They were calling their brothers and sisters, say, you are bombing us. But people are so brainwashed. It's sad for me to see what's happening and what, you know, Putin turned Russian people into. I feel bad for that, because a lot of them are going to die, and it's going to be very bad for Russia too. It's sad to see that, but this war has to be won by Ukrainians, and anyone has a chance to say that you can stand up against dictatorship, you can stand up against evil and win. Otherwise, if evil prevails, it will have a lot of bad consequences for the rest of the world.
I mean, you're talking there about the war. I've been to the Ukraine twice. In fact, this Easter, I was just looking at Ukraine. I was on the border on the Danube. And I know you're talking a lot about the character of Ukrainian people. What do you think is the special nature of Ukrainian character? Here you are, Ukrainian born in the Congress, but what's the special nature of the Ukrainians? Is it God, country, or what is it?
Well, I think, you know, maybe unlucky for geopolitical location, Ukraine always been historically in the middle of fight between East and West. You know, Ukraine was a front line to stop Mongols, you know, when they came on the Kiev Rus, you know, it was in the middle of every war, you know, whether it's fighting with Hitler, we're fighting Cossacks. I have Cossack heritage fighting against czars, you know, Russian czars, you know, Ukraine had, you know, under Stalin, you know, I had my family sent to die because they were landowners, you know, and, you know, so a lot of people be trying to get killed and suppressed for generation, you know, and that's why I developed this love of freedom, because when you're suppressed and oppressed for that long time in the middle of fighting, you develop resiliency and understand what it means and what it takes to have it. So I think this is common. People say that, you know, you cannot, you know, the freedom doesn't, you know, go through our bloodstream. If you do have strong beliefs and strong heritage, you're going to pass your children that love for freedom. You can see it. I can see it in Cuban Americans here in Florida. They're all freedom loving, you know, and the same with Ukrainians. You know, I had so much suffering, almost like if I look at my family history, most of my family history under Stalin or Hitler, most of my family was killed, you know, in all of these wars, you know, so you understand what it's at stake and how you want to win to have peace.
I mean, Zelensky has done a fantastic job, but about a year ago, less than a year ago, you were slightly critical of him. I think you said that he was playing with politics and theater. I don't know what you meant by that, but what crossed your mind?
Well, listen, every leader has to be questioned, you know, otherwise they turn into gods, okay? And Zelensky is not God, and he has to make sure that he's overseen and put pressure when he's doing things right or wrong. You know, I think Ukraine did a terrible job not in getting ready for the war, and that is actually his fault. We went there a few weeks before that, and I said, even during the Soviet Union time, we were preparing, you know, that US is going to attack us, and we were preparing populations for the Americans attacking us, and you are not preparing your population, regardless if Russia is going to attack or not. You have to be ready. You are already in the middle of major war for a long time. You know, why things are not ready? And during the war, when the war started beginning, the war started, was a serious, brutal war, and they started playing politics with a lot of, because there was so much politics in Ukraine, a lot of corruption, a lot of infiltrations by Russian. It's very complicated issues, and you need to take it seriously, these issues. And I told my country that we spend a lot of resources, we spend a lot of money. We need to make sure that they go to the right people and succeed. These countries are complicated with oligarchs and bandits and corruption and everything else. These democracies are fragile. The check and balances of institutions are not established, allowed to take a lot of power for president, and we don't want even good or one, whether you like him or her or not. You should never allow so much power to one person. That is dangerous for any country, and that's what we're fighting in our country too. So I think these questions need to be, and I told we need to make sure we know what's happening. We cannot not have an embassy. We don't have people there. So I push on all of these issues because we want to make sure that Ukraine is going to succeed, and our interests, strategic interests, are going to be successful at that. So we got better. But I think any attitude, any leader, if a leader is not questioned, will start turning into dictator and things start getting to head, and that is not good.
Yeah. You see a war from both sides, with an American hat and Ukrainian hat. What's the one thing that you say that Ukrainians don't quite get about American support? And inversely, what is the one thing that the Americans don't quite capture, or at least Americans in your district don't quite get about the Ukrainian war?
Well, I think one thing that, I always tell Ukrainians, you need to understand that, there is a brutality and suffering. It's hot. I call it like genocide, really what's happening right there for freedom-loving peoples that willing to stand up against the government, which is a danger to Putin's regime, because he understands that can say, Poles are different, Baltic people are different, but Ukrainians are too similar, and they can be free and actually independent and have a freedoms and be able to not to be oppressed. That is danger for them. But it's also, you need to understand that every country deals with their national interests, and you cannot not take it into account. And you need to create a policy and environments that are going to be in the national interest of other country, because people do from the goodness of heart, but at some point, every politician will help you to accountable to the people of their country and going to say, why is your problem should be before my problem? So Ukraine also needs to make sure that you have a major war, and you need to put internally every resource possible, to fight and win this war, not just wait that the West only going to be constantly, providing for you, and need to understand the dynamics of politics a lot of country, and engage and make yourself relevant for these issues, and work with politicians, and also work not just presidents. People don't understand the power of institutions like Congress in United States. It's different maybe than Europeans, that, where presidents have a lot of, like especially in Ukraine, a lot of power. Parliaments are really not effective. Congress actually on the books has more power than president. We're not exercising it, but we are much stronger because we have power of the purse and power of the war, which we're not exercising usefully. I think that's something that I try to always educate Ukrainians, and some things is wishful thinking. But don't fight the things that are not realistic, not on the table. Don't spend your energy, you're wasting your time. Some things are not on the table, and you have to live with that reality. And maybe it's tough, but you have to understand that if you want to succeed, put your energy in things that are achievable, feasible, and make them work. I think that is something not understanding of the, that very broad geopolitical things. It's really, because we have a lot of people there that very new came to government. They don't understand a lot of political minutiae. That is very important. From an American side, I think, unfortunately, we learn about wars. People always say we learn geography from wars we're fighting in, So I think, it took a lot of ways for American people to really, when I first came here, people always say, oh, you're Russian, like people didn't know the difference between Ukrainians and Russian. Now people do. And American people, honestly, this is because of American people, we engage in this war like that. They put pressure on Congress and on administration, seeing the brutality. So I think American people, see what's happening. American people are very worried about the whole situation, but we also have politics, we also have drama, we also have Russia and China trying to infiltrate and do a lot of propaganda here. We also need to make sure that, we have a better understanding, what is really happening and what Ukrainian people are fighting. We're not fighting, this is the people's war for freedom, for ideals, for ideas that we have. And it's not about, one person, and it's not about even the territory. It is about the people, defining their future. It is about having the freedoms for people to live in a society where, like Americans, where you as a human being have an ability to make a difference, not a top-down dictatorship run by bandits and oligarchs. And that's what Ukrainian people are fighting for. And not most, Americans maybe not even see that in this way. Russia has no reason, no excuse why they enter Ukrainian territories. There is no excuse to doing that, and I don't think we understand the history much. I would say Chernihiv, Prince started Moscow. Ukraine has more claims to Russian territory and Moscow than Moscow has to Kiev. If we go back to history, but honestly, we decided after World War II that we're not going to try to revisit all of this history, because you can start a lot of wars, and we should stop there. Otherwise, we can turn it into huge can of worms.
You made a very strong case as to the strength of the Ukrainian people in this war and how they're engaged, and I can see it just in the way you answer. When you go back to your district and go around and people are talking about the cost of living and this and that, and some people don't even know where Ukraine is. Here where I am in Romania, they often confuse Bucharest with Budapest. I imagine, do you find that the Ukrainian leadership is thinking, wow, we better get this job done before Americans get too inward looking, before a campaign comes along like next year and people start playing politics with it? Is that a real concern from what you get from talking to Ukrainian politicians, or leadership, I should say?
Well, I think, listen, this is a complicated war with a lot of things, but yeah. I think we have to be strategic. It's important for us, for the West, to have a strategy and know where we want to get and align strategies with tactics, because in a lot of ways, it's going to depend on us, because it's very difficult for Ukraine, to win this war with, with country of that size and quantity of weapons and people, right? Yeah. So we have to be realistic. Ukraine needs to help, but it's also national security of all of us to stabilize the situation. So I think there are some things that we need to lead and have a discussion a little bit, how we can reform security and infrastructure of the world. We cannot have the situation is all or nothing, right? We have now a situation, if one child gets killed in Romania, we're going to have the full force of the West come in and defend the country. But if millions get killed in Moldova or Ukraine, it's irrelevant, right? So I think this is becoming very dangerous. It became very dangerous from, nuclear proliferation issues. Ukraine was the third largest nuclear country. We, forced Ukraine, rightly so, to give up their weapons. Well, now they have a nuclear neighbors that just wave a flag and say they do whatever they can do. So every country is going to think now about that. We create a lot of these gray areas of uncertainty, just very destabilizing. So I think this is our job, how to do that. But job of Ukrainian also to make sure that they understand the dynamics and have a strategy where they're going to land, and also not just rely on the West, but also rely on the internal resources. And actually, Ukraine could be very useful in doing some things, with opportunities, with resources and human capital that actually could be helpful to the West and be a great alliance partner. But they need to step up to that level. And I always tell them, you need to show how you can be in the national interest of Europe, of Eastern Europe and United States, of the West. And you need to have some real reforms done internally too, which they are not doing too. But ultimately, it's in both ways. But I think we have to think about this and how these things can do. And I don't think we've been very proactive on this issue too.
I'm going to turn to my colleagues, people who are watching in a second, but I had one question, because you mentioned the question about leadership. And many people think that so long as Zelensky and Putin are in charge, no one's going to back down. Is there another figure in the Ukrainian political structure who's sort of a figure in waiting, or somebody, who could be, who could step forward? Is there any sense of a hierarchy? In the United States, we just have the vice president, so that's the obvious person. How about in Ukraine?
Well, I think, the reality is it's not about Zelensky. Zelensky, he's a politician. He's driven by polls, okay? He is not, what a lot of people think, okay? But let's not touch that subject, okay? But he's a very good politician. He does polling, he does messaging, and if Poland tells him one thing, then he will do it. If they know, and it's where the Ukrainian people are. So he's reflect where Ukrainian people are. And I think, unfortunately, we're not doing a good job engaging in a broader structure in Ukraine, and have now parliament that became dysfunctional. So there is no good representation of the people. It creates a lot of problem, okay? Because ultimately, Ukrainian people and Ukrainian military, they're the winning this war, not Zelensky. I'll be honest with you. They would have lost it if they would rely on him. Okay. This is my honest assessment, but knowing more than you think.
Well, that's good. That.
But this is the reality is they have a strong, capable military, experienced guys that fought from 2014, have strong control and command. They can fight with junk like no one else can. And when you give them good weapons, they're real good. Okay, Russians, a top-down approach until the command gets to central command. They kill a bunch of little people in the middle, they're done. Okay, so the experience of the military, the will of the people, the strengths and volunteers, that's what it is. And that's what is driving that. And this is the problem. The longer war continues, the more losses are. These people say, what are we going to be doing? Like they destroy our lives and livelihoods. They destroy our children and killed our mothers and kids. And how are we going to agree to that? So I think this is becoming a problem, because it's not about him. It's about Ukrainian people now saying, what are we going to sacrifice and what it's for? So I think it is becoming the problem. In Russia, Putin will sell whatever he has to sell. He has a complete dictatorship. He has a complete dictatorship. He will do propaganda. He can sell anything one. When Putin started understanding that he can lose this war, he'll get to the table. And he will only understand if we send good weapons fast, then he'll know, okay, this is going to be serious for me. Then he's going to sit down to the table and he can sell whatever he wants to Russia. He has a complete control and command of that country right now. Unfortunately, Russians are on complete dictatorship right now. Media, everything control. So he's not as big of a problem, but we need to figure out how we can resolve the situation with Ukrainian people and figure out some solution that is going to be workable. But without West, this is not going to be resolved. And we cannot just say, oh, we're just going to put hands off and not going to be. We will have to provide some structure, to provide some guarantees of security that, that whatever that's agreed between sides could be enforced. Without enforcement, resolutions do not work. And enforcement, it goes with weapons. That is the only thing you can enforce. And weapons is deterrents to further aggression. So if we want to do better and have more deterrences, we need to think how structurally we can better equip Ukrainian army, to have, to hold the ground, to protect their country, and we can do it, and then drag Russia to the table to agree to that. But we'll have to be Western countries, and maybe it needs to be even, some coalition of willing, United States, UK, maybe some Eastern European, because not everyone probably in Europe will be with us, which is fine. It doesn't have to be every country. Maybe we need to think about different arrangement, but that needs to happen. The sooner we start talking how we're going to resolve it, the better off we're going to be, because we cannot continue these crazy wars, because they can bring much worse if we don't deal with them.
Yeah, well, it's a very good point. Also an interesting idea, but a different sort of coalition. Let me just turn to my colleagues. If we have any questions right now, I have a list of them, but Jim, you look, Ambassador Rosebud.
Sure, I'm happy to. Thank you for joining us, Congresswoman. We appreciate you coming to the Gala and appreciate you being with us today. You're so knowledgeable and so passionate about this. We really admire you. In addition to your expertise on Ukraine, you have expertise on the Congress of the United States, being a member of the Congress of the United States. And I think all of us who are concerned about our partnership with Romania and its place in the world appreciate the bipartisan support that there's been for NATO and supporting Ukraine. There have been questions raised, particularly in the Republican caucus in the House. I know last year there were, I think, dozens of Republican members who voted against the aid package, and this concern you read in the media about whether that bipartisan support is going to hold up. So I'm curious, what do you hear from your Republican colleagues who are not as supportive of you as you are of Ukraine, and what do you say to them?
Well, let me tell you a little bit politics, because, and I kind of was disappointed what Democrats did. And I told them on the personal level, that was disservice to Ukraine and the whole cause. to take Ukrainian aid package and put it in huge bill that Republicans couldn't vote for her, and they did it a couple of times. You could have a standalone vote, it would show the support, but if you put 98% of stuff that Republicans hate, and then you put 2% there that, they might be supporting, most people on the sound mind, it's a betrayal of your views and ideals if you're going to vote for that. And I think that was actually very bad for Ukraine that they did it their way. They played politics, they went into election and tried to do in some of these areas that, it was plain politics, unfortunately. So Ukraine been dragged into American politics for a lot of reasons. It's bad for Ukraine, but Ukraine still has a bipartisan support, and I think that is something that, but there is a different views on that. And I think the views have to be addressed. And I think administration did a terrible job, and Democrats would agree with that, communicating with Congress. If you don't inform Congress well, American people are not informed well, and that is very bad for the long-term involvement. So I think Congress people on volunteer basis spend much more time engaging with that, and administration is not doing a good job, and that is a problem. But if you look at politics, I think there are some things that rightly so, and a lot of people on the conservative basis, they don't want this never-ending wars like in Afghanistan. A lot of Americans want to make sure that we have strategy and tactics, and we need to make sure that our strategy and tactics are aligned. We need to make sure that we have proper oversight, that money and weapons that we sent to Ukrainian people actually get to the people, because there is, these countries are tough. Even infiltrations of Russians is very significant in this country, sabotage potential. So it's important for us to provide this mechanism. And I think that was most concerned. We will always have people on both edges that generally don't like any wars or any foreign involvement. It's all, we always had it, but that is a small percentage of people. I think politics of Democrat Party and maybe some of the not wise decisions by Ukrainian government to be too closely aligned with Democrat Party and President Biden did the service and allow some of Russian propaganda to penetrate, but the penetration is not that strong. And most of my colleagues would say, listen, we don't trust to send Ukraine cash, but I think we need to do better weapons. I think most Republicans we actually pushed better weapons. The only reason Ukraine got more security assistance is the first time I met with Mitch McConnell, and he doubled the aid. And then I talked to Mike McCall and McCarthy, and we specifically target security assistance. We increase it for Ukraine, specifically forced to have it in the bill, dedicated to Ukraine, not too broadly, and also increase draw down authorities for president purely because of Republicans. Democrats have Obama sent blankets to Ukraine. Trump was the first one who actually sent real weapons. So if you want to fight, with the war, you probably want to fight with Republicans, but we also need to, Ukraine got in the middle of a lot of politics, including presidential politics, but still on a bipartisan basis, there is a significant support of this effort. And I can see it even from my conservatives. They just want to have more accountability from administration.
Thank you.
The question of coalition, you mentioned a new kind of coalition. I imagine you're thinking about a sort of two-tier track of support from the West towards Ukraine. On the one hand, you have the Baltic nations, you have Poland, you have countries that are closer to the theater of battle that seem more engaged and willing to go a step further. Would you go so far, before we get into the coalition argument, would you go so far to say that it's okay to put American weaponry like planes in this war?
Well, I think, we shouldn't, and I don't know how we got into discussion, offensive, defensive weapons. Ukraine has defended this territory from aggression. Whatever it takes for Ukrainians to stop Russian aggression and win this war and stop this war, it should be a deterrent. So we shouldn't be going through all of these details, what it is. We should have been more proactive. We should have sent these weapons before the war started. That would have been the best deterrence, because Putin wouldn't be rolling in with flowers, thinking they're going to get flowers with his tanks, into Kiev. If he saw that stuff, he saw the situation on the ground and he was going to take advantage of it. He's not dumb, okay? He understands what what's happening. He understands what's happening in Afghanistan, weaknesses of the West, weaknesses of Ukrainian government, opportunities he had. He underestimated Ukrainian people and Ukrainian military, purely underestimated, and also volunteers, and how many people went on the ground, including volunteers from Europe and America, and were helping Ukrainian military, Ukrainian people, just ordinary people, not even military people. And there are some other circumstances, maybe God sending to delay an Olympic game, the attack Olympic Games and warmer weather and a lot of other things. So there is a lot of things that the strengths of people and God help Ukrainians to be able to hold the ground and be where they are. But I think it's important for us, if we want to be serious about this, actually to send whatever it takes that Putin gets to the table. That's the only way we can stop this war. And I don't think anyone wants to have never-ending wars. I don't think it's good for anyone. And I think we have a lot of problems, but such a major war brings to no good, and have such a major war in European territory is not good at all.
I agree with that, Congresswoman. I have to be a staff member here because I'm told you have to go to the floor. So I would just like to thank you so much for your remarks. I think they were terrific, and then we wish you good luck in terms of your efforts in this war effort, and also in your district.
Well, it's always a pleasure, and I appreciate what Romania doing, and a lot of other, European allies and Eastern European countries. And I think especially Eastern European countries who understand, what it is being under dictatorship, and what it takes, what is Russia up to always, right? So they have a lot of history and understanding. So I think it's important. I think being much closer to frontline. I think Eastern Europe is important voice, but also I think Eastern Europe could be an important asset, for us as Americans, to have great and strong allies in Europe. I think Western Europe has a lot of challenges. And I think Eastern Europe can bring that fresh energy to Europe, which Europe really needs badly too. But also, I think it's important for Europeans, and that's what I would like to ask you as Europeans, to work with us and show what Europeans are contributing to this war, because it's important for American people, because, American people want to make sure that we're working together, and sometimes maybe it's not shown as well as it should be. And I think the contributions, it will take all of us to do it, but I have no doubt that, good always prevails, and we're going to prevail at it. It just matter how many lives we're going to save, and I hope we can save more lives.
Thank you very much. We'll get that message out, and I think it'll be a receptive audience